Good evening. I'm Kathy Lewis, and here's what matters tonight. The Republican Party is gathering tonight and tomorrow in Richmond to choose a nominee to run for the U.S. Senate seat that's been held for 30 years by Senator John Warner, who's announced he'll end his Senate tenure in January. Lisa Godley has a profile of the three men who seek the nomination.
John Warner's five-term run as the distinguished and much-respected U.S. Senator from Virginia is almost over, and the push to find his replacement is about to clear its first hurdle. Right now in Richmond, thousands of delegates to the state Republican convention are meeting to decide which of three candidates can beat the Democratic nominee in November. Some say former Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore is a shoo-in for the GOP nomination. The Gilmore campaign believes he will virtually carry every county in the state. I recently sat down with Jim Gilmore, who shared part of his vision if elected to the U.S. Senate.
Well, the first thing we have to do is do something about the high energy price, the high gas prices. We just absolutely have got to increase our domestic production of oil. We just have to. We have to control government spending, which is out of control. We have to deal with these issues of pork barrel and earmarks, which are so prevalent in Washington, D.C. And if you do those things, then you don't continue to increase the tax burden on the people of the United States. You can afford to do what you need to do in terms of continuing the federal tax cuts.
The intent of this legislation...
Gilmore's strongest challenger, Virginia Delegate Bob Marshall, isn't about to throw in the towel, especially with the strong support he has in the northern part of the state. Marshall also shared why he feels he's the best man to replace John Warner.
I worked for one U.S. Senator, Admiral Jeremiah Denton, a conservative Democrat from Minnesota, John Blotnick, on the Public Works Committee. He chaired that, and I worked for Bob Dornan from Southern California. But I'm the only, actually, candidate who has legislative experience, both in the General Assembly, and I worked on Capitol Hill for about 6.5 years.
The third man vying for the job is newcomer Bob Berry, a native of Hampton Roads who touts himself as the candidate who can restore strong conservative leadership to Virginia's Republican Party. Berry has never held elected office, but says his experience in national security and intelligence would be an asset to the U.S. Senate. Meanwhile, Bob Marshall is spending time making sure the voters of Virginia recognize the differences between him and Jim Gilmore, especially when it comes to social issues like abortion.
He thinks abortion should be legal for the first 8 weeks. I overrode Jim Gilmore in 1999 on a law that was based on a U.S. Supreme Court decision for hard pornography that you can't, in other words, you can't sell, Lisa, a Hustler magazine to a minor. I said you shouldn't be able to do the same thing by the internet. Jim Gilmore disagreed. He did not want to sign my law. I overrode him.
As for Jim Gilmore, he is moving forward like a candidate with the nomination firmly in hand, ready to take on his Democratic challenger.
As a matter of fact, my opponent, Mark Warner, when he ran for governor, he promised he was going to finish out that car tax cut, and then he didn't do it. He promised he was going to eliminate the death tax. When the bill came to his desk, he vetoed it. He repeatedly ran saying that he was not going to raise taxes on the people of Virginia, and he did. Now, of course, we have the federal tax issue here. We're running for the United States Senate. The proof of what a politician will do in the future is based upon what he has done in the past.
And this weekend, during the Virginia Republican Convention, some 4,700 delegates will not only consider the candidates' best accomplishments, but also weigh in on which of the three GOP candidates has the best chance of retaining the Senate seat that John Warner held for 30 years. For What Matters, I'm Lisa Godley.
And we are delighted to have with us tonight retired Congressman, ODU political science and history professor, Dr. G. William Whitehurst, Dr. Bill as he is known, and Dr. Whitehurst's teaching colleague from Christopher Newport University is Dr. Quentin Kidd. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for being with us tonight. What an interesting convention we have underway. And Quentin Kidd, tell us why we're doing this in the Republican Party in a convention format. That was seen to have quite an impact on.
In fact, a fourth candidate who is not in the race, Tom Davis, a congressman from Northern Virginia, bowed out of the race in part because the Republican Party chose to go to a caucus as opposed to, or a convention as opposed to a primary. And it really reflects the strength of the conservative element of the Republican Party and the strength of Jim Gilmore to mobilize that conservative element to have a convention as opposed to a primary. A primary was seen as something that would do Davis better a convention would do Gilmore better, and so Gilmore won that battle, sort of the first skirmish of this Republican primary.
Yeah. And Bill Whitehurst, we hear a lot of conversation. I heard, in fact, from two of the three candidates about a return to Republican values. And that means different things to different people. I wonder, as you look at this race, what does it mean for you?
Well, I think for Oban it's going to be a hard campaign for any Republican this year. Also less expensive, Clinton, by going to a primary, not having a primary. I think there's a lot of nostalgia for the Reagan time, and they want to go back and try to recapture the kind of dreams that Reagan had. Of course, that was a different era. The Cold War was still going on. Reagan was talking about bringing down the evil empire, less government and so forth. But you have to really wonder what the issues are for the Republican Party now. And it's hard to identify those issues. I don't think you can just simply replow the Reagan era. There needs to be, in my judgment, a set of goals that are tangible, that can be seen. And I don't think those goals have been identified.
And it's interesting that you say that. We had a chance earlier this week to talk with Bob Berry, who is one of the three candidates. And when I put that question to him, the first thing he talked about was securing the border. He thought that was very, very important. And then we heard from people who heard that answer, who identified themselves as Republican, who said, I am tired of that kind of rhetoric. There has to be something else that is in the Republican kit bag than securing the borders.
I think you're quite right. And I think the people who called in are correct in their criticism. That's been beaten to death, and nobody has really come up out of the Republican Party with a solution to it yet either. I think a lot of attention, is always the case, will be focused on the presidential race.
Right.
And whatever happens in Virginia will take a back seat to that. And how the candidates, both Mark Warner and Jim Gilmore, react to McCain and Obama will be, I think, factors in their election, or they fail to be a failure in election, as the case might be.
You know, Kathy, I think in these three candidates you see the three sides of the Republican Party. You see in Jim Gilmore a lot of discussion about taxes, the size of the federal government, the size of the tax burden on the taxpayer. That's one side of the Republican Party in Virginia. You see out of Delegate Marshall a lot of talk about social issues, abortion,
right,
gay marriage, etc. That's another side of the Republican Party in Virginia. And then out of Bob Berry you hear a lot of discussion about what I call the new social issue that is fascinating the Republican Party, and that is border security, the war on terrorism, and those sorts of issues. And so in these three candidates you see, I think, the three sides of the Republican Party. And I have to say, I think Jim Gilmore has the advantage here. I think it would be a real knockoff if Jim Gilmore were to lose.
Yeah.
And I think that suggests where the party sort of is going in Virginia. And I think they're right. They've got to find an issue, and an issue that goes back to, as Congressman Whitehurst suggests, it goes back to Reagan, is taxes and the size of government. And that's where I think Gilmore has the advantage here.
You know, it's interesting when you look at those three gentlemen, because I don't think that anyone, including Jim Gilmore, would identify himself as not being a conservative, and yet you look at Bob Marshall and he says, I am very much more conservative than Jim Gilmore, and Bob Berry would tell you exactly the same thing. So it's an interesting situation for Governor Gilmore to be in, because he is, in a conservative collection, the more liberal of the three.
Perhaps pragmatic is the word.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Don't forget.
I'll probably get a call about that.
Don't forget that Congressman Tom Davis, who bowed out of this race, would have been the most moderate of the Republican candidates running. It's a reflection of sort of where Republicans are in Virginia, that sort of the Virginia version of a Rockefeller Republican simply said, I'm not going to jump into this race because I have no chance.
And so what does that say for the future of the party if it is so deeply controlled at this point by one or two factions there?
I think it mirrors the national image of the Republican Party, quite frankly, Kathy. And I think there's going to be we're going to fall back and punt. The Democrats are going to win control of the Congress this year. That's going to happen. The presidential race, I think, is less certain at this point. although Obama certainly looks to be favored. But then, of course, the Giants won the Super Bowl, so I think anything's possible. Truly, I think there's a lot of feeling on the part of Republicans, okay, each of us are going to fight our battles, but we all know we're not going to get control of the Congress. The other guys are going to have it, and have a lot of problems in their hands, and then perhaps we'll find ourselves. In the meantime, what they can stake out for themselves, they're going to do it. Quentin, I don't know how do you feel about that.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think that's right. And, you know what?
So it's sort of like a drop back and fight another day.
Yeah,
type of thing.
I don't think Jim Gilmore is thinking I'm going to drop back and fight another day. I think Jim Gilmore is thinking I
Clearly
can beat
not.
Mark Warner.
Right.
I haven't talked to him about this, but I think Delegate Marshall probably thinks I'm standing up for a position, for a principle that I think is really important, and I think it's important to the Republican Party, and I don't want the Republican Party to lose sight of that. I think he might be doing that sort of stuff. I think people lose sight of the fact that when Jim Gilmore was governor, because the House of Delegates was on his side on the tax and spending fight, they sort of people lost track of the fact that within that caucus, that Republican caucus in the House, and between the House members and the governor, there were a lot of controversies about social issues. And so we see that reemerge.
That's a good point, because there is a lot of differing opinion on that.
Right, that's exactly right.
So going back to our strategy that suggests that maybe the party goes away and tries to figure out what its new messages will be, and let's say they have a retreat somewhere nice probably, you know, because most of those are pretty nice, right? Yeah. And they call you and they say, give us your best thinking on that.
Let me say something else, if I may. McCain, I think, is going to be a major, major factor in this, in that if he catches fire, people will want to coattail him. And I think that they will then start to echo some of the things that McCain is suggesting in the way of solutions. And on the other hand, if Obama fails to identify issues in a way that people can see them and can grasp them, then you'll see Democrats who are running, even though they'll win control of the Congress, will start to identify each one his own interest. Politics is volatile, as we all know. It was in when I was in office, and there's a lot of this, frankly, wetting the finger and holding to the wind. First, in terms of what your constituents are saying to you, but also in terms of what you see in your leadership.
Yeah.
I think there's another element to this as well. You know, the coattail analogy is a really good one. I think there's another way to look at that, and I think a lot of Democrats would want to look at it this way. To what extent will Mark Warner have coattails? If you look at the polling between Mark Warner and Jim Gilmore, Warner is 15, 18 points up, and he's been pretty much up like that for months.
Yeah.
The question is, how much does Warner have to win before it starts helping Obama in Virginia? For example, will there be coattails that aren't normal? Normally the president has coattails, the presidential candidates. But is Mark Warner so popular, and can he maintain that through an election in such a way that he helps a presidential candidate in Virginia? I think that's a fascinating study that we can do this fall.
Well, now that you've brought Senator Obama into the conversation, we should probably talk about the fact that certainly Senator Webb and Governor Mark Warner have both been discussed as potential running mates for Senator Obama should he proceed to win the nomination. What do you think those prospects look like?
Oh, who knows? You know, I heard Jim Webb say yesterday that all the attention directed at me is really driven by me trying to sell my book right now, and it isn't anything else. He's probably being very honest about that. I mean,
so you think some publicist is sitting there?
Yeah.
Although you can't, you know, it's been very interesting to watch his work on this GI Bill and the way that is really catching fire.
I mean, you know, to be more serious about it, I think it depends on which states. You know, these parties have elaborate strategies about which states are going to be in play. Is Virginia going to be in play or not? I think the odds are that it isn't going to be in play, greater than it is going to be in play. But I think it has a lot to do with, for example, is Nevada going to be in play? Or some of those western states going to be in play? If they're not going to be in play, then it might be worth Obama, if he's the nominee, to look to Virginia and really try to put a lot of energy into Virginia. So I think it's yet to be decided, really. I still think it's a long shot that Jim Webb would be the nominee, or the vice presidential nominee.
How about Jim Webb or Mark Warner from where you sit, Bill Whitehurst?
I don't think it'll happen either. I think he'll, in a certain sense, it's like JFK back in 1960. And he picked Lyndon Johnson, not because he was lost in admiration of him,
Right.
because he wanted Texas.
Yeah.
And I think looking at this race, and the fact that Mrs. Senator Clinton has laid such emphasis on the important states that she's carried, that he might be tempted to pick someone from one of those states that's really critical to him. I don't know. Get a Ouija board.
That might be just as good an answer, huh? You know, I know you, when you left politics, you said, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
It was a good ride, had a good time, ready to move on. And I respect that. If you had, though, been coming along and coming of political age in today's world, and I know that's kind of a hard thing to put yourself in the mind of, but do you imagine that you would have been as interested in being in political life in this environment?
Well, that's a tough question,
In a
Kathy.
24/7 news cycle and all the rest of that?
Yeah, and what frightens you is the enormous amount of money that you have to raise. I'll give you an example. My last opponent was Bob Washington in 1976, and we raised $130,000, and I thought that was a lot of money. 10 years later, when Joe Canada and Owen Pickett squared off, Joe raised $500,000, and I think Owen raised a comparable sum. It may have been more than that. I'm just blown away by those numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I was asked to run by Bob Dumar, when I had lunch with him and talked to he and Wayne Lustig, a little voice inside said, "Go for it, go for it, go for it." And but it was a different era, and politics was a lot less partisan than it is today. That's perhaps a foolish thing to say, but it's true. I mean, the campaign, yes, you're partisan when you debate your opponent, but the fierceness of it today and the other elements, the 527s that have gotten into it, make it such an unpleasant experience, I think. I can't say that I really enjoyed debating my opponent, and it was a new experience for me. But I'm not certain I would be as enthusiastic today as I was then. Of course, I've gotten older, I've experienced a lot, and I'm certain that my age today and what I've been through in my life would also influence how I would react today.
Sure, sure.
But then I was 43 years old, and you think and you act a lot differently then, and you perhaps are more naive at that point than you are when you're 83.
Well, fair enough.
Been there and done that.
Fair enough, fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about Senator Warner, if we may, because that is the position for which these three men are vying for the opportunity to run against the Democratic candidate in the fall to go to Washington. That's kind of an interesting story when you look at who Senator Warner has been. You talk about challenging an opponent. He has certainly challenged opponents, but he's also walked across the aisle a number of times.
Just to give you a sense of, I think, how things have changed in Virginia and nationally, when John Warner first got involved in politics and ran for office, he was the more conservative side of the party. And we look at him today and we think of this moderate, you know, sort of common sense, let's do what's right by the people. And so, I mean, things have really changed in the last 30 or 40 years.
That's interesting because he lost to Dick Obenshine in the convention, and Dick was further to the right. And Quentin, I remember when, after Dick tragically was lost in an airplane accident, that they were the old guard. Some of them, I'm talking about the second district, were hesitant about Warner, and yet he had come in second at the convention.
Yeah, I guess I'm comparing him to Linwood Holton.
Oh my word, yes.
In that context, where he represented a more conservative side of the Republican Party. And
I quite agree with you. I think that's true.
And it is such an interesting point. You mentioned the plane crash, and I think people who haven't been here for a long time don't know that it really was, I don't want to say accidental, but I mean, he was not the nominee originally.
He was not the nominee. It was there were 10,000 people at that convention in Richmond. I didn't think we had 10,000 Republicans in the state of Virginia. And I went there supporting Holton, and he just did miserably. By the second ballot, Linwood was out of it. Yeah. And then Warner had come to me beforehand and asked me to support him, and I said, I've already pledged myself to Linwood. And so I told him, I said, but if Linwood drops out, I said, I will support you, and brought the second district delegation over to him, or at least most of them. but it was a dogfight right down to the end. Liz Taylor was there, and she was wearing a sailor outfit and waving him on, pushing him, and so forth. But Obenshain had that rock core conservative support, and I could see it. It's going to be hard to break through, and so as it turned out, Obenshain got the nomination.
So Obenshain came in first, Warner came in second,
very close
and then
second.
Obenshain was killed in a plane crash
about 6 weeks, 2 months later, and of course the correct choice was Warner. And they erase, as a matter of fact. People say my vote doesn't count horse feathers. In that race, they had to have a recount. It was 2 votes per precinct when they had the recount that he beat Andy Miller in that election.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is amazing when you look at the way that one's political fortunes can change very quickly, and by just a couple of votes or by just a quirk of fate.
There's a lot of chance involved in politics.
There really is.
By no stretch of the imagination a science.
And if you think about it as well, you think about the idea that John Warner came in there. I hope it would be fair to say that there were a lot of people when John Warner first came in who said, well, he'll do a fine enough job. I think they sort of thought he was sort of a society guy and he would do an all right job. I don't think anybody anticipated what he really has meant to the Senate.
Liz Taylor was a major factor. He admits it in his being elected. She went around with him. I remember a story told me that old Bill Tuck had been governor of the state after the Second World War and also had a tenure in the House of Representatives. John called him and asked him for his support. He said, Liz will come down here to Danville and plant a kiss on me at the airport. I'll support you. She got in the plane, went down and kissed him, and he supported him. And so she was around. She was here in our area for a while. She came down and campaigned for him. I'm not saying she made absolutely the difference, but she was a factor. You're quite right.
Yeah.
But he had a good record. He'd been Undersecretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Navy. He'd been head of the American Revolution Bicentennial Commission. But a lot of people didn't realize that.
Right.
But he earned his spurs. And let me make a comment about, I don't want to monopolize this thing, but when I was a conferee from the House Armed Services Committee to work out the differences between the 2 defense authorization bills between the House and Senate, and met in a room in the 4th floor of the Capitol. It was like the black hole of Calcutta, and we sat across it and wrestled verbally with the senators. I got the measure of Warner at that meeting because I saw how his colleagues deferred to him and to his wisdom. And we didn't have the press there. Nobody was demagoguing the public. We were wrestling with this bill and the pieces of it, and he was very knowledgeable. And that's when I saw the excellence of the man as a U.S. Senator. And that was something people outside could not see.
Well, Bill Whitehurst, thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Bill, good to see you. And I still want to come over and take a class sometime. Thank you so much.
Guaranteed A for you.
Guaranteed an A, the first time.
Take one with Quentin. He's a great teacher, too.
As indeed so, no question about it. And Quentin Kidd, thank you for being with us as well. It's been a very, very interesting conversation. I'll be back in just a moment with a final thought. Since we've spent some time in conversation tonight about some of those who wish to replace Senator John Warner, it's probably fitting to say a few more words about the man himself. Last week, he presented an updated version of global warming legislation that's clearly very important to him in his waning days in the Senate. The revised bill would reduce emissions by 71% from current levels. It'll be an uphill fight to get the votes that he needs, and the president has already promised a veto. But this is just one of several high-profile issues on which Senator Warner has marched to the beat of his own drum. There is also his co-sponsorship of Senator Webb's new GI Bill, which the president has also promised to veto. And Senator John Warner also supported Governor Mark Warner's tax increases in 2004. Politics be damned, he said. Let's consider what's best for the men and women of this great state and their families and their children. Well, Senator John Warner hasn't yet said whom he'll support in the race to fill his seat, and it is not a given that he will support a Republican. He's refused to endorse his party's nominee before, supporting independent J. Marshall Coleman for the Senate over Oliver North, the GOP nominee. Senator Warner, says political scientist Larry Sabato, is a centrist, one of relatively few in the Senate. But now that Virginia is turning more purple, it seems the Commonwealth may be a better political match now than it was when Senator Warner first took the oath of office 30 years ago. Well, we would love to know what you think about Senator Warner or the Republican candidates who seek to follow him in office. Write to us at 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk, Virginia 23508. Call us at 889-9437 or give us an email at whatmatters@whro.org. Also, don't forget to check out our new website at whatmatters.tv. You can leave your thoughts and comments there. You can engage with other viewers in online conversation about what matters. You can also look at past shows. And we thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we also thank you for being a part of this broadcast. Lots of you are letting us know how much you appreciate a return to local programming. We're very glad to be bringing it to you. We'll see you next week.